Okay, in this lesson we're going to look at setting up the drums. I always start this by just scanning through the score and just seeing if there's any loops that can be copied or manipulated, and see where kind of how many of the parts are going to change. So as we just scan through, the first drum part starts at this bar here, bar 16, or middle of bar 16, and then it goes into the main loop. If you look at the main loop here, which is on bar 17, you'll see that it's exactly the same as bar 18, bar 19, but not quite the same as bar 20. So you're going to have to find that and kind of copy that in. Now, there's a few ways that you can copy from the score. A lot of my students like to use score editors. They find it a little bit more simple to get their head around, especially if they're not necessarily musicians and they're not comfortable playing in. They tend to use a score editor. A free one is this one here called noteflight.com. It's online and you can have up to 24 scores in there, so you're only going to need one for La La La. As you can see, I've input the drums and it writes drums really well. I'm really impressed with that. I also use Sibelius, and actually I think this probably writes drums slightly easier. Once you've written your part in, you're probably saying to yourself, okay, well, how am I going to get that into the sequencer? It's really, really simple. All you do is go to File, Export, and you export as a MIDI file. Press OK. Once you've done that, you can just press, you can find out where you save the file. Normally I save it within my actual file structure, and then you can go to your Logic sequence and you can just drag the file in. So that's one way. The way that I most prefer to work is within the drum editor. This is, sorry, the piano roll. This is the piano roll here, and you can see all the drums are pretty much laid out. If I just play this for you now. Okay, so the first thing that I've done is just inputted all that data into the piano roll, and as you can see, I've cut up all of my loops. So anything that's in blue is something to do with the main loop. This is that little variation that we saw. You'll notice that my bar numbering is slightly different to the score. That's because I've actually put in the pre-intro. That's not included on the score, so I'm 8 bars out from the rest. So once you've gone through and you've worked out where all the loops are, you can actually create yourself a nice little colourful grid like what I've done here. Let's just zoom in, and you can see there's drums all the way through the verse, all the way up into the end. It's only the last 8 bars that don't really require drums, and actually I haven't finished this yet because this last few bars has got some sporadic drums in it. Once you've got all of the drums inputted, you don't have to worry too much about the timbres of the drums. I've chosen a nice little drum kit here called the Brooklyn drum kit. This is new in Logic 10. If you're working with Logic 9, you're going to find something similar. It's just a live kit. I'm going to do lots of editing to this kit later. I'm not necessarily going to get that completely ready now, because what I tend to do is during the later stages of the project is I will break up the drum part into multiple parts, so having each instrument on a different track. So having the bass drum on one track, the snare on another, the hi-hats on another. This allows me to do lots of panning, lots of EQ, lots of effects processing and dynamics processing without actually having to do it to the whole track. So that's quite nice. I tend to do that with all my drums, and it gives them a bit more of a real feel. So pick yourself a nice drum kit that you can work with. Don't spend masses of time on the editing of the timbre now. Just get it to a fashion that kind of sounds the same as the real track, and then we're going to move on. What is important in this part of the process, getting the drum tracks down in its complete entirety so you've got something to work with as a groove, and then editing the actual notes, making sure you've got the parts absolutely correct, because it's something that will take you a lot longer if you leave that till later. So getting the timbre is not 100% necessary, but getting the notes accurate and getting them edited is. Which brings me to my next bit. If I go to bar 26, which is this one here, 25, what you're going to notice is I've got different colours to each of these, and that's a velocity control tool. So if I just zoom in, I'll give you a bit more of a look at that. That's a velocity control tool. So if you come up to your tools and go to velocity tool, you can actually drag it up or down, giving the notes, the individual notes at different volume. This is really important. To get that live feel, that's going to be really important. Another thing that you're going to want to do is drummers tend to have a bit of a better groove. So you're going to want to edit the note. In the early stages, what I tend to do is come up to just the pencil tool and I will just crop out the notes. So I'll make them shorter or longer to suit. Now with this particular track, the actual beats are quite snappy. So you're going to need to probably just make them a lot shorter and just, you know, make them a bit more snappy. A lot of the envelope shaping will do that as well. But those are the first two things you need to do. Velocity tool and the pencil tool, just to shape those notes a little bit. You don't have to do that. If you've played this in, you're not going to have to do as much of that. You might have to do a bit of quantizing, but you're not going to have to do as much of that. But if you've typed it in from Note Flight or the piano roll, you need to do a lot of that to get the actual groove right, okay? Okay, next on my list is making sure it sounds right and making sure it's completely in time. The good thing about having the track in the sequence is you can come in here and I would mute the track that you've done, have the piano roll open and listen to the track. So we're going to solo the song, we've muted the drums, but we're going to look at this drum track. So what I'm going to do is loop select all of these drums and you'll see they come up in the piano roll. I'm just going to make that a bit smaller so we can see more of it. And I'm going to press play. And as I press, and you can see that everything is in time. And if there's any mistakes, you're going to pick them up doing this kind of preview. Let me just press stop. I'm going to go towards the end because there's a few deliberate mistakes towards the end that I just haven't edited yet in the score. So if we press play here, you'll see that the groove in places is slightly different. I'm going to have to come back and edit it. Here it comes. There it is. You see that note there? Wasn't quite right. You see, so I've actually put a note in, but when you listen to the track, it's not there. So it's things like that that you can be very precise with, especially if you've spent the time getting your track in complete time with your actual layout. You can actually spend a lot of time just looking at the piano roll and making sure everything is right and correct. And don't move on to the next track until you've done this process. Okay. Once again, we're going to come back to the drum track later on. We're going to separate out. We're going to do a lot more work with the actual editing of the timbres and panning all the parts out and making them sound correct to the song. The most important thing about this part of the process is that you get the editing of the actual notes correct, and you do a lot of the manipulation of the sound shaping. Okay, here's my track for a little bit, and then I'll let you guys crack on.